Michael, I'm very fascinated by your book, The Economic Collapse, The Beginning of the End. I wondered, what made you even think to write the book?
Well, the beginning of the end was kind of the result of a long process. Over the years, I've done so much research on my websites, the Economic Collapse blog, endoftheamericandream.com, about the coming economic collapse, about the emergence of the Big Brother police state, and all these things which, I'm incredibly concerned about the direction of our country. But I wanted to not just preach with the choir. If I was going to do a book, I wanted to reach a new audience. I wanted to kind of push the envelope. So, and in America today, everyone loves a great story, whether it's the Hunger Games, whether it's, any of these novels, which are Harry Potter, people love a great story. So what I did in this book is I wrote a novel, a very entertaining mystery/thriller, which a lot of people are really enjoying. But in the book, I've included all of these what I call truth bombs. In almost every single chapter, there's nuggets of truth in there. So as people are reading the book, they're also waking up. So hopefully it's something that people can give to their family and their friends, and they can, and their family, and maybe it's even people that you can't even sit down and have a conversation with about all of these things, but you can give them the book, and in the process, they can not only be entertained, but also wake up.
Well, I think that's what's really fascinating about it, in that a lot of people get information sometimes the best way through another medium when they don't even realize it. Sometimes you get some of the best truth through comedy. George Carlin was talking about the 1% versus the 99% for years, and the way he got it to his audiences were in some of the best bits ever written. And just like in this book, people think they're reading this great thriller, and it has all this, interesting plot twist in it. But meanwhile, you're educating them on all different things that are going on in the world around us, including an economic collapse. So I know that's really what you're known for with your blogs and all. So I really want to get to that. What do you really think is the main culprit behind the really, terrible economy that we have presently in the U.S.?
Well, there's a number of things. One of the biggest things, of course, is debt. You go back 40 years ago, and the U.S. national debt was about $500 billion. Today, it's over $17 trillion. Or you go back 40 years ago, the total amount of all debt in our society, totaling up all forms of government debt, all forms of corporate debt, all forms of consumer debt, the whole ball of wax 40 years ago was about $2 trillion. Today, it is more than $56 trillion. So over the last 40 years, it has gotten more than 28 times larger. So we're basically drowning in debt as a society. At the same time, our ability to create wealth, produce wealth, is being gutted. Our economic infrastructure is being absolutely gutted. We've seen tens of thousands of businesses and millions of jobs shipped overseas. Since 2001, we've seen more than 56,000 manufacturing facilities in this country shut down. You look at cities such as Detroit. Once upon a time, it was a thriving metropolis. The middle class was thriving, and in fact, at one time, the city of Detroit actually had the highest per capita income in the entire country. Now it's a rotting, decaying, festering hellhole that's completely bankrupt, and it's a joke to the rest of the world. But what's happening to Detroit is actually what's happening to the rest of the country. The rest of the country just hasn't gotten there yet.
Who do you see as the blame for this? Do you think it's more Republicans, more Democrats, or do you think it's really both?
Well, I believe that it's both. I believe whether we've had Republicans in office or Democrats in office, we've been generally going the same direction, going into way too much debt, seeing our industries and our jobs being shipped overseas. Under both Republicans and Democrats, government has grown tremendously. Government dependence has grown tremendously. Regulations and taxes, and just crushing the middle class, crushing entrepreneurs. In fact, the percentage of Americans that are self-employed is at an all-time low, crushing small business in this country. Meanwhile, corporations have gotten more and more power. And of course our liberties and freedoms have been stripped away under both Republicans and Democrats. So really they're just two wings of the same party, and no matter who's in power, we just continue to go the same direction.
Well, I agree with what you just said. I say pretty much almost weekly when I open my show and my rant how both parties are really contributing to the downfall of this country in a fast way, because neither party, when in office, has really done anything to reverse the course that we're on, and the deficit is getting larger. It's in the trillions now. It's just getting worse and worse, and there's really no light at the end of the tunnel, which is a kind of really gloomy and sad thing. So that leads me to something I want to ask you about now, which is at the forefront of all the debates right now going on in Washington, Obamacare. What do you think Obamacare's effect on the economy and on the middle class is?
Well, we've already got a middle class that is being absolutely eviscerated, especially over the last decade. You go back to the year 2000, and since the year 2000, the number of working age Americans without a job has increased by 27 million. And that number, back in the year 2000, you total up the percentage of working age of Americans that either were unemployed or were considered to not be in the labor force. It was 75 million. Today it's 102 million, an increase of 27 million. So many people struggling for work these days. Median household income in the United States has fallen for 5 years in a row, and we're seeing poverty numbers absolutely spiral out of control. For example, just under Obama, the number of Americans on food stamps has gone from 32 million to 47 million. So people are falling out of middle class. People are struggling to make it from week to week. In fact, a survey conducted earlier this year found that 76% of all Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. So people are just trying to survive month to month. And now here comes Obamacare. And Obamacare, people are seeing their rates go through the roof. For example, one study found that the average health insurance premium for men under Obamacare is going to go up by 99%, and for women it's going to be an average of 62% increase. And some groups are going to be hit even harder than that. One study found that health insurance premiums for healthy 30-year-old men will rise by an average of 260%. So can most American families afford this type of increases? No, they can't afford a 60 or 90 or 260% increase in their premiums. In fact, one family down in Texas, they just got a letter from their health insurance company. This elderly couple down in Texas, they had been paying $212 a month for their health insurance. That was pretty good. But then they got a letter from their health insurance company saying, your old policy is canceled. We're offering you new policy at a premium of $1,356 per month. In other words, it was a 539% rate increase. Middle-class families, they can't afford this. They're losing the policies that they had been depending on, that they're comfortable with, that they could barely afford to pay, and now they're being hit with these new health insurance policies with massive increases. It's absolutely going to crush them, and it's going to suck all kinds of disposable income out of the economy as people try to find some way to pay for this health insurance.
Well, families obviously have to have health coverage, and I'm of the opinion that it should be a right more than a privilege, that everyone in America that needs any kind of health treatment and care, should be able to get it. I mean, if your kid falls down and gets injured, no one's thinking about, I hope I have coverage for this. You just want to get your kid to the hospital and get them looked at and cared for and better. So with that said, I mean, what's your view on health care for the people in this country? Do you think it should be something that should become a right, become an amendment to the Constitution, that everyone gets it, the government provides it, or keep it totally privatized? What do you think?
Well, I think what we had before was terrible. Our healthcare system was a disaster before Obamacare, completely in need of reform. I mean, we pay far more for healthcare than the rest of the world, and most of the time we have to wait longer to see a doctor than most of the rest of the industrialized world. So why can't we at least do as well as the rest of the world and pay about the level that they pay and get about the same level of care? Why can't we do at least as well as the rest of the world? That boggles my mind. So obviously we need reform, and obviously, it's something that everyone needs. When people have, a health problem, they need to go see a doctor. So we need to figure out some way to do this. And see, most of the rest of the world, they don't burden employers with this. This is another thing. Most of the rest of the world is provided outside of the workplace. They don't force employers to provide. Is provided by the government or through some other means. And so this puts our businesses at a strategic disadvantage, because employers are sitting there and they have to provide health insurance for their employees while their competitors in other countries do not. So that gives competitors in other countries an advantage in labor costs, for example. So there's so many things wrong with our healthcare system. But now under Obamacare, a lot of these middle-class families that can't afford health insurance they're just going to say, well, we're going to go without. We're just going to pay the fine or whatever. But the thing is, if you go to the hospital today and you're in a major accident and you have to go to the emergency room and stay in the hospital for a night or two, that can easily run into the tens of thousands of dollars. Or if you get cancer, a serious cancer, by the time you die, you can potentially rack up more than $1 million of medical bills trying to pay for that. So something's got to be done because our health insurance system was horrible before. Now under Obamacare, it's even worse.
Well, what's scary is if you look at the statistics, and I think you make great reference to them on your blog, more families, I believe, go into bankruptcy because of health-related costs that they have from emergency situations that take place that they just don't either have enough coverage for or any coverage for. And that's a pretty alarming thing because you work hard enough as it is. You try to make ends meet. You try to make a better life for your family. And this family's out there working not one but two jobs and doing everything that they can. And like you said, they're going check to check. They're living week to week. And now here comes health insurance. And forget even getting good coverage. It's like you said. It's amazing. You have to wait to get in. The care may not be excellent. But then a lot of the plans that the people even have, you have these huge deductibles. What a lot of people don't even realize is that they're paying into these huge premiums. But even having that policy, when they walk into the hospital itself, before the insurance policies even kick in, a lot of these policies out there today have deductibles of $5,000 and $10,000, which these families have to pay themselves. And who has that kind of money just tucked away? Families aren't even taking vacations or getting those little extra luxuries that you work hard for. They don't have $5,000 and $10,000 put away. So you have this horrible situation where families are going broke over getting health care. And then we look overseas and we see what they're doing in England and France. You just look north of the border in Canada, and they have all these, care plans in place that work, provide the coverage, and they do it at much less cost than we're doing here. So I don't understand why we just can't accept that model. If the U.S. is so good at adapting and changing with the times, why haven't we just accepted the model of these other nations that are allies of ours? Just sit down with them and say, wow, you have this single care kind of payer provider service through the government. It seems to work. And as you said, it'll make it easier not just on the working class of people, but also businesses, because businesses don't even contribute or pay to that. Well, why don't you think the U.S. has done that?
Well, I think the biggest problem is greed. I mean, you've got the pharmaceutical companies. Pharmaceutical drugs in this country cost 2 or 3 times, or sometimes even more than that, what they cost in other countries. The pharmaceutical companies, there are dozens of them that are making more than $1 billion a year. There's just so much money in it. Then you've got the health insurance companies making enormous amounts of money, and they were the ones that wrote big stretches of the healthcare law. They actually wrote much of Obamacare, and and what investors think of Obamacare in these health insurance companies. If you look, since Obamacare was passed, the stocks of health insurance companies have gone up tremendously. So obviously, the people that are making incredible amounts of money, health insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, these big healthcare executives, there's so much money in the healthcare industry today. In fact, if the U.S. healthcare system was a separate country, it would be the 6th largest economy on the entire planet. So there's so much money involved in it. That's why people don't want reform, because people are making just a massive amount of money from all of us getting sick.
It's just mind-boggling. And when you think of that, it'd be the 6th largest economy in the world. It has to make someone's head spin if they really understand what that truly means in the real numbers. And what's sad is we could just do things better if we really learn how to efficiently spend money, and healthcare is just one problem. If you look at education as well, and I think you touched on that a few moments ago, we spend more per capita also trying to educate our kids, and yet our educational system is not ranked anywhere, I think, even near the top 20. And I just find that amazing that we're not doing things to really advance our society, and it really starts with healthcare, education, and things like that. Let me just ask you, do you really foresee this path that the country's on right now, a point where the dollar could potentially collapse and we get some form of hyperinflation hitting us?
Well, but before we get to that point, I do believe that eventually we're going to have a tremendous amount of inflation, the dollar completely collapsing. But before that happens, I believe we're headed for another major financial panic / collapse, bubble bursting, kind of like what we saw back in 2008, but on steroids. You know, people think back to 2008, and they think, well, you know, we had these banks too big to fail, but that's been fixed, right? No, actually, it hasn't been fixed. In fact, the 6 largest banks in the country, I'm talking about J.P. Morgan Chase, Citibank, Bank of America, et cetera, the 6 largest banks in America, over the past 5 years, they have gotten collectively 37% larger over the past 5 years. Meanwhile, 1,400 smaller banks in this country have gone out of existence or been absorbed by these bigger banks. So too big to fail is now bigger than ever in this country. Meanwhile, these big banks, they've become more reckless with our money and their money than ever before. In fact, there are 4 of these 6 big banks that each have more than $40 trillion of exposure to derivatives. The biggest chunk of these derivatives, in fact, is made up of interest rate derivatives. And according to the Bank for International Settlements, all over the world, there's a total exposure by the banks all over the world of $441 trillion of exposure to interest rate derivatives. So this is a bubble that is hanging over our financial system, which could burst at any time. And people need to understand that Wall Street, our financial system, has been transformed into the biggest casino in the history of the world. And at some point, this house of cards is going to fall down. And when you're talking about the kind of numbers I just talked about, when this house of cards falls, there's not going to be enough money in the entire world to fix this problem.
Do you think when that bubble bursts, you mentioned back in 2008 when it burst, do you think it'll be to the level and to the severity that it was going back to the years of the Great Depression, or even beyond that?
Well, I believe eventually it's going to get beyond that. I believe eventually we're going to see unemployment skyrocket well up into the double digits, and eventually I believe we're going to see unemployment in this country over 20%, the official rate, not just the unofficial rates. You know, I believe we're going to see millions more people lose their homes, and, you know, millions upon millions losing their jobs. We're going to see just economic suffering in this country that we haven't seen since the Great Depression. I believe eventually it will get even worse than that. And in response to that crisis, which I believe is coming, I believe we're going to see money printing by the Federal Reserve like we've never seen before. I believe we're going to see the prices of, you know, things we buy on a regular basis, such as food, such as gasoline, things of that nature go crazy. But then if people still don't have jobs, they're not going to be afforded at any price. You know, we're just, you know, we're seeing the whole system start to fail, and this is going to manifest itself in some very disturbing ways, I believe.
Well, what I find alarming is when that point does come, are we going to go into a state of martial law? And earlier you said how you see a lot of our personal and civil rights eroding. I mean, it should be alarming to everyone. You just have to look around on a basic walk outside. If you go into the store, there's cameras now that are posted over all the different street lights. We have drones now that are going to soon be coming over, you know, U.S. soil and monitoring what we're doing. You know, everywhere you go, you track with your cell phone, not even knowing it, or if you have one of those easy passes in your car, emails are read. I mean, it's to the point now where surveillance is so high, and a lot of people are like, well, we have to do that because we're living in a state of terrorism. And, you know, the government has done a good job of fear-mongering to get people to accept all these restrictions on our rights so they could do this. My question to you is, do you think all these different levels of surveillance are being put in place and all these restrictions on rights are being done because they are doing this in anticipation of some type of economic collapse so they could really have the country prepared for a state of martial law?
Yeah, well, I think the elite are always preparing for something, and they love to bring order out of chaos. They love to have problem, reaction, solution. And I believe that they're much more aware and concerned about rioting and looting and civil unrest than the average American is. And I believe they're getting prepared for these things. I believe they're going to happen. I believe they can see kind of what's coming down the road, and that's the reason for so many of these strange moves, the stockpiling, the drills that they're doing, and then the putting in of the passive listening devices, the cameras in our cities, the automated license plate readers, this Big Brother surveillance grid, which is growing in hundreds of different ways constantly all around us, watching us, monitoring us more. We're headed toward a totalitarian society. And see these upcoming, and in fact, these upcoming, I believe we're going to see riots and looting and crime, and in fact, violent crime in this country increased by 15% already last year. And, we haven't even gotten to the next wave of the economic collapse. But, they're going to use the upcoming instability as an excuse to bring in more of what they want, which is their grid, their surveillance, their boot down on the necks of the rest of us. It'll be an excuse for them to do the things that they want to do to take things to the next level.
So what can we as citizens do to prepare for all this? I know on one of your blogs you make some mention of time about prepping, and you talk about how the mainstream media tries to, portray preppers as just these crazies who are out of their minds. What's your take on that?
Yeah, well, the mainstream media, they represent the establishment, and the mainstream media, they can't understand why people don't have faith in the system, why people don't have faith in them. When they tell us everything's going to be okay, well, who are these people to be preparing for doomsday, that things are going to fall apart, So they in response, instead of listening to what we really have to say, making our case, instead it's just easy for them to dismiss us as kooks and loons and whatever. But, I'm encouraging people, I'm saying, hey, this disaster, these economic problems that are coming, they're not going to be averted. No matter who we vote into office, no matter what we do, it's not going to be avoided. So I'm encouraging people to prepare on an individual, a family, a community level to get ready to weather the coming storm, because it's going to be really hard. But people say, well, Mike, you're all doom and gloom. But I don't see it that way. I believe there's hope in understanding what's happening and hope in getting prepared. The people who are not getting prepared at all, I believe they're going to be blindsided by what's coming. They're the ones that are going to be giving into despair. And those are the type of people that are going to be jumping off of buildings, committing suicide, going crazy. But people who have already hunkered down and say, okay, we saw what was coming, we got prepared, those are the people that are going to be okay. In fact, they're going to have things to share with others. And then in the times of greatest crisis, that's when there's the greatest need for heroes. You just think back through history. When the times of greatest crisis have been, that's when our greatest heroes have arisen, and the people we hold up throughout history is saying, oh, those were great people. Well, we're headed for a time of crisis in this country, and it'll be time not to shrink back in fear, but to be prepared for what's coming, and then it'll be a chance for you, me, and everyone else to be heroes, to make a difference, and to do something positive in a time when things will be increasingly unstable and going crazy. So I encourage people to look at the hard years that are coming as an opportunity to make a difference.
Well, I agree with that. I think that people are in charge of their own destiny, and the actions that they take are their own, and the choices they make are their own. And when things like this do happen, you either step up or you go into the background. And people really need to see what's going on around us right now and get the information. Do your own research, read the internet, read books, look at as many different sources of media as you can to get different points of view, and formulate your own opinion on these things, and instead of just blindly accepting what the mainstream media is trying to force feed you on everything that you watch on TV or hear on the radio or read. And if they do that, I think people will really start to wake up a lot. And the other thing is what you said, they have to step up. There has to be new heroes. And I think a big part of that is new leadership, getting away from the Republican and Democrats that are basically controlling the government completely, and get new leadership in there, whether it's new parties, people affiliated with no parties, just people that will step in with different ideas and ways of doing things that really have the people's interests at heart. And as you said, you speak about heroes and people stepping up to bring about change. I wanted to ask you, what is it that made you get involved in this? Like, why should people listen to Michael Snyder? What's Michael Snyder's motive? Like if someone hears this interview and they say, this guy says a lot of things that make sense, and I want to go to his page and look him up and get a little more research about him. what is it that really inspired you to even get involved from the very beginning, doing the blog, doing all of this, trying to get a message out to people? Like, what is it that makes Michael Synder tick?
Well, I think so much of what you just said really motivated me, because today people don't think for themselves. They let others think for them. They let the television think for them, or the mainstream media. They're kind of caught in this matrix where they don't call it programming for no reason. All this programming is constantly being fed into their heads. For example, the television. More than 90% of what we get through our television is controlled at the very top by just 6 gigantic media corporations, which, and of course, in turn are owned by the establishment and the elite. So more than 90% of what we're getting from our television is controlled by them. And then the Republicans and the Democrats, both major political parties, are largely controlled by the establishment and the elite. So I'm encouraging people to break out of that. I was working right in the heart of Washington, D.C., down on K Street. I was working as an attorney, a low-level attorney, but I was working as an attorney in one of these huge law firms, and I was so concerned a number of years ago about the direction this country was heading. And I thought, well, what can I do? I'm just someone who gets up and goes to work every morning. No one's, how can I make a difference? Well, I started writing. And at first, very few people took notice of it, but I just kept at it. Eventually, I started the Economic Collapse blog, and it really struck a chord, because people, most Americans in their gut realize they're not getting the truth from the mainstream media, or at least the whole truth. And so people are searching out alternative sources of information, whether it's radio shows such as yours, websites such as mine, whatever the case might be. But we've seen the explosive growth of alternative media in recent years because people are hungry for the truth. And so, I'm just trying to do the best that I can from my little home. My wife and I moved to Idaho a couple of years ago. We love it up here, and from our little home, we're trying to make the most of a difference that we can. And I encourage everyone else out there to do what they can to make a difference and to try to help people to wake up while there's still time.
Now, with that said, I'd just like to say I urge everybody to look up Michael Synder and go to his website, the economiccollapseblog.com or endoftheamericandream.com, both fascinating sites with tons of information. And I also urge everybody to take a look at his book, which you can purchase from Amazon.com and other locations, The Beginning of the End, which is a novel that takes all these general things we were just discussing and puts them in a novel form. It's an interesting read. With that said, Michael Synder, this has been completely a very interesting interview. I know you don't come out a lot to do this. I really appreciate your time coming on, and I think I'd love to have you come back so we can discuss more of these issues and maybe go into religion next time a little bit more.
Oh, I'd be glad to come back on sometime. Thank you so much for inviting me.
It was our pleasure. Thank you, Michael.